What is crack-a-lackin', fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming with you, at you with my fantabulous co-host, Grant Hughes. We are here to discuss NBA awards now that the regular season is over. And yeah, it's over. We are waiting for the play-in. The awards were brutal. We tried to do them a little bit earlier, and then we were just like, we can't do them. So we're going to do them now, the day after the regular season. We haven't even hashed out an order. I don't know who Grant's going to pick for most of the awards. I have an idea on some. He's already informed me that he's about to drop all sorts of spice. But the question we are most interested in, as always, first and foremost, Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing very well. I hope you're doing the same. And the main reason I'm doing well is there are no games today and no us having to figure out like what happens if Team X beats Team Y and holds a tiebreaker over Team Z, but not Team A, B, or C. And it's just nice to have some clarity, I think. So, and also speaking of, I wouldn't call it an epiphany, but in some of these awards debates, I feel really good about a couple of them that I felt totally uncertain of up until literally yesterday. So I don't know how that lines up with your confidence level or your certainty, but I feel good about where we're at.
I was laboring over this until I'm still laboring over some of the decisions. Like we might be recording and there's gonna be like, you know what, I decided to put so and so number one. The thing that annoys me is I labor over my back of the ballot too much. Where it's like there's only three spots for everything except MVP, and then there's five. But like I have 12 or 13 players listed for most improved.
Oh, do you really? Wow. So in a lot of them, I just didn't even look past where the main debates were, with some exceptions. But like for MVP, not to jump right into it, or we can, maybe as well start there in a minute here. But like there's two guys, right? And it's just between Jokic and Embiid. And like, I guess the case for Giannis, if you wanted to make one, is sort of doable. But beyond that, it's just sort of shout outs, like guys like SGA or Tatum or however far down you want to go. Those are almost easier, but like the all NBA and all defensive and stuff like that, it's just my apologies to / honorable mention list are like annoyingly long, and there's cases for almost everybody in those situations. So I don't want to make it out to be like I have total certainty in all of this, because a lot of them are, you could swap out like 3 or 4 of my all defensive guys for other people, and I don't know that I could argue against you with any conviction,
Well, please tune in to the second half of this podcast, which will not be live on YouTube if you're watching right now, to hear Grant's really arduous, long struggled over all NBA takes. As we see if we get any stragglers in here, let's begin with a lower stakes award. Actually, no, let's begin with, we can go to MVP right away if we want to. I want to get off my chest the criteria that I'm holding.
Okay. That's important, right? Because we may look at it a little differently for some of these.
And I think sometimes people don't like this preamble, but I'm really trying to be consistent across the board with how I decide these awards. And I think, I'm not sure if it's this year more than ever, but playing time, total minutes, not so much games played, mattered to me. And I'm not in the habit of penalizing guys for what happens when they're not on the floor. I'm also not going to be in the habit, at least hopefully not, of trying to reward guys too heavily when they have shitty benches that are going to help their, on-off splits. And I think that's important to stick to. Now, I did allow myself where the 2 ways I looked at this was I'm trying to encapsulate the story of this season, I think, when we look back on it. And that's what I'm looking for at the top of my ballots. Certainly for winners, when we get into all NBA and all defense, I'll mention this again, I'm going to allow more fungibility on the back of my ballot. So third team all NBA, 4th, 5th spots on my MVP ballot, maybe even 3rd spot on my other ballots. But like when I'm trying to pick a winner, I really did, and I guess this might hold true more for all NBA teams than it does actually awards, but I think there's one award where it's going to come into play a really great deal. I'm trying to be consistent with it where it's, well, we don't get to say, player X is MVP. And it's this is a good example because it's not part of the equation anymore. Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic played so tightly together in minutes that it's not, Jokic has this big gap. But if we were going to look at it that way for MVP, it needs to kind of be the same for defensive player of the year to me, unless it's just this guy's by far and away so much better on a per minute basis that no one can even touch him. And unless it's that type of case, like I'm at the top of my ballots, I'm trying to be consistent across the board with it this year.
I think that's a good approach. I certainly, I don't know why it's happened this way for me, but I think it's because the word valuable is in the title of the award. And so it's almost like that's okay. Thankfully, we have sort of a guide for what this award is supposed to be. It's supposed to determine value, MVP. So I view that as distinct almost in the way I try to evaluate the criteria for that award from literally all the others. And I think it's most different from all NBA because for all NBA, I'll just say, I just set a 55 game limit. If you're over that, I will consider you. If you're under it, you're just out. So that's going to cost like some really good players from consideration for my ballot that I think if I were telling the story of the season, for example, I would include a couple more guys that just didn't make that 55 game cut. For MVP, it's less black and white than that. It's just value. So cumulative matters. So to your point, I think we agree on that front. I evaluate MVP, I think the same way you're going to evaluate a lot of your awards. I'm just a little different in the other ones. Because again, like what goes into all NBA? It's just, is that these are the best 15 players based on the positional breakdown that played over X amount of minutes, or is it just the best players with almost no criteria for minutes played, unless it's something ridiculous like 25 games or something? So I'm a little fuzzier on most of my other awards, but MVP is just strictly this season who provided the most value. And I think we both agree, or at least this is my position on it, that's different than who's the best player in the NBA. That's kind of that conversation has been had and rehabbed, I think, during this season, because I don't think most people view Jokic or Embiid, maybe Embiid, as the best player in the NBA, but they have been the two most valuable. So that's kind of a different conversation for me. So the criteria for these are always tough, right? Because there just aren't really guidelines. You kind of have to decide what is important to you.
I will say, you just talked the perfect amount for me to be able to get out of social media promotion on this podcast that we're recording at this moment. So I thank you for that. I wanted to ask you very quickly before we do get into this, how did you view, I think there are people that are going to talk about so-and-so's playoff track record, or even if it's not a track record thing, it's, well, how does this value scale to the playoffs? And I am very much, this is a regular season award. If you need it to be, if the race is so close and you need it to be the most razor thin of tie breaks, that's fine. But that cannot be the crux of your argument. And I actually have a question about MVP. So I guess we should do MVP first after you answer this. But I have another question relative to this about a select player's case. But so how do you grapple with that? Not even just playoff track records, but, well, how does so-and-so translate to the postseason?
That is the perfect segue for my MVP pick, because there are a handful of arguments that have been made, I'll just say, against Jokic in particular, that I find like not only unpersuasive, but just completely irrelevant. Because so what you're talking about, playoff track record or how this player scales in the playoffs, it's the same question really framed in a different way as who's actually the best player versus MVP for the season. I don't care about any of that. I don't care about Jokic's defensive issues in the playoffs when he's getting targeted. I don't care about who's made it farther between him and Embiid in postseason series historically. The other thing I really also don't care about is who won the MVP last year or the year before. I find that so logically incoherent to give a shit about, are we going to give Jokic a third? And I'll just say I am. Jokic is my pick. And I understand people that say, I'm uncomfortable with the idea of this guy having 3 straight MVPs that puts him in a club with like the greatest of the greats of all time. That just feels weird that he's in that group with the limited playoff success he's had, because we value that so much in like GOAT conversations and whatever. I don't care. If he's the best player, if he's the most valuable player again next year, I'll give him a 4th one. Like, it's just a regular season award, and it's just measuring who provided the most value to his team during the year. So nothing could matter less to me than what happened last year or the year before. It does not factor in. And I don't see how you can consider that unless everything else is completely equal and you need some crazy tiebreaker to make some distinction that just otherwise isn't there. So that's the start of my Jokic for MVP cases. I don't care about the voter fatigue stuff. I don't care about 3 in a row. I don't care about his playoff track record. So does any of that factor in for you? And to what extent, if so?
No. And first of all, I think let's go back and look at the numbers. Joel Embiid has not been a playoff world beater. And I don't want to get into the habit of grading his case, because I think there's a case for Joel Embiid. And the question I wanted to throw at you was, it's not even a question. I find it insulting to Joel Embiid's actual case when people say it's just his turn. Giannis has got his,
Right.
Jokic has his, it's just Embiid's turn. No, that's, you want to pick Embiid, make a better case than that. You know what Joel Embiid's case is? He's super dominant. This is what I struggled with. And my pick is I have Jokic, Embiid, Giannis. I am mad. I'm going to give you my 4 and 5 spots too. I want to be first on something that people board the bandwagon on. And I thought I would be here, but I think because we waited too long, and my last MVP ladder was like a month and a half ago, I have Shea 4th, followed by Jason Tatum 5th. And
I think that would be my 4 and 5. I don't know about the order, but those would be my 4 and 5.
I fucking suck. Like, I think I'm picking something that might be novel, and it's just the same old shit. So that's my 5. I think with Embiid, what I really struggled over, and one, I do think recency bias comes into play, where I was not impressed with how Jokic and the Nuggets played down the stretch. It didn't feel like they were trying to really self-discover or do anything revelatory so much as just like, did they check out? I'm not going to give them bonus points if they were just like, hey, we're going to conserve for the postseason. You don't get to do that. I don't want to hear also about that. Oh, Jokic was, if you don't think he was scoring enough, for instance, I think that's a dumb argument. But when people are saying, well, like, he's playing chess here because he's trying to let his other teammates find themselves before the playoffs, like, okay, then you credit Joel Embiid for taking defensive plays off to conserve himself for offense, and then also to just come out and then be dominant across the defensive level. The two things I struggled with when picking Jokic were, and look, I look at Jokic, the numbers are absurd. I think a lot of people view Joel Embiid as the most dominant player in the league. That's fine. But like, if you start to break down how they're scoring, both of, like, looking at unassisted buckets, they basically have the same share of their made baskets going unassisted. Jokic, 70% plus true shooting, one of the highest marks in the NBA, certainly the highest mark in NBA history among high volume scorers. He's not living at the rim, and neither is Joel Embiid. I want to make that clear. And then looking at the share of the offense they count for when they're in games they've played, Jokic is like, between his assists and his points, is like well over, even if you look at the total season points in games he didn't play, he's like pushing 40%, 44% of his team's like total offense accounted for. Neither Giannis or Embiid come close to touching that. Again, that's not the end all be all. It's everything else that we've mentioned, where Jokic elevating the play of his teammates. The Nuggets, when they're at full strength with Jokic on the court, they're better than the Sixers are with Embiid. They're better than the Nuggets are with Giannis. Now, the gap has closed there, but when you start to futz and fiddle with, I think some people have been too dismissive of Denver's supporting cast, but like, when you're going to toggle with James Harden and Tyrese Maxey, you're still figuring out ways to win those minutes without them. You're killing people in the minutes when you're pulling the Nuggets' second and third best players off the court. And basically any lineup with Jokic is going to be an absolute killer. I think the gap, again, has closed enough to where it's debatable. What I struggled with finally was, there's something about the way Joel Embiid plays offense. It's more, I don't want to say, it's definitely not more methodical. It takes longer. And like, maybe he's surveying the court more, but like the doubles, there's more of an inclination. When you go look at the double team stats, he's being doubled on a larger share of his possessions, and then he'll score against them anyway. Where like Jokic is going to, before the double even comes, if it comes, that pass is already gone. And
100%.
There's a pull, because not that Joel's doing this on purpose or his game is uglier. It looks like he's doing things so much more difficult. And I feel like our defense is like reacting more to that. And then the other thing that was most tough was the defensive discrepancy. Jokic has been, and I don't want to say this lightly, but I'm also not trying to be inflammatory here. He has not been good on defense this year. There have been moments.
That's a factual statement. He's just not a good defensive player.
There have been moments, particularly later in games, where him and the Nuggets, like, their rotations are on point and they're moving a bunch. By and large, he has not been good. The fact that the Nuggets are better defensively with him on the floor, I think, is a testament to his rebounding. Maybe some stuff he could do in passing lanes. It mostly is just a testament to how much they fucking suck after their top 5 or 6 players.
Right.
And for the most of the season anyway. Has Joel Embiid brought enough defensive value to make up the gap between him and Jokic on offense? If that's your case for Joel Embiid, I think you have a good one. I haven't seen it enough in Philly from him. And I think just like, he doesn't feel like the same player further away from the basket. Not that he needs to come out a ton, but there's more like, not simplicity to their coverage. I didn't feel him as much on defense this year. And I think if we looked at just maybe like the latter third of the season, maybe he's the pick. Just like if we looked at just the first 2/3 of the season, Jokic is probably the runaway favorite. And
And
so,
and Luka's probably top second or third too. So you got to just look at the whole thing, because if you, like you say, if you partition this off, you get all kinds of weird results.
yeah, I cannibalized too much time there, but like that's where I landed on there. And so I'm just like curious your thoughts on that back of your ballot as well. The
Yeah,
Giannis, we haven't talked about Giannis's case. Why is he so low?
yeah, no. So for me, so just to add some, I'll put some numbers on what you said, because I agree with literally everything you said. I just the numbers. So when I said at the top that I essentially, so we have Brent Burnett, the Joker is MVP because he's performed the best. Joel did well, but the stats show Joker. Preamble to this, preamble to my other preamble. Yo, like I feel like I have like 14 things I want to say. Can we just agree that as we are making the case for Jokic, this is not shitting on Embiid. Embiid was the second most valuable player in the league. And I could be persuaded, had you come with a bunch of data that could have swayed me to Embiid, I just didn't find it. I'm open to that existing. I just got to go with what we know, right? So
it feels like, doesn't it feel like his strongest case that I've seen written so far is that he bridged the gap to Jokic, and it's
that
just
he
like,
got close.
yeah, let's be. I will say, when I went back to look at the catch-alls over the past like few weeks, a lot of those like they're more mixed than not. They
Yeah.
used to just be Jokic, 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 and it wasn't even
Right,
close.
right. No,
And so,
the advanced
go ahead.
stats case for Jokic was like just an open and shut case until like a month or 6 weeks ago, basically. And Embiid caught up in a lot of them. But so the on-off stuff, I know that a lot of it does just emphasize how bad Denver's supporting cast is, or how poorly they perform without Jokic on the floor. That's still like valuable information to me, because it speaks to how much he's elevating a team that otherwise is bad, aka adding value, right? Like that's a component of value if your team needs you so badly, and that's obvious by how poorly they perform when you're not out there. So and obviously Jokic has crushed the on-off net rating swing per cleaning the glass all season. He's like a plus 25.7. That's absurd. Embiid is awesome, and he's at 12. So it's more than a 2x difference. And so that prices in the difference in those two teams supporting cast. But so if you're not persuaded by that, I think you just look at the on-off stuff, in the on-off split. So Denver with Jokic on the floor, its off-rate rating is 124.2. This is per cleaning the glass, so we're filtering out garbage time. 124.2. That's like unfathomably high. Embiid on for the Sixers, 119. Also awesome, but we're 5 points short, right? Defensive rating for Jokic, 111.6. Not bad. Embiid, 110.2. Better, but that's pretty close. And it does not. Yeah. So just putting the numbers to your point, the gap is just it still favors Jokic. The other thing that's interesting to me is, even though Jokic lost ground in a lot of the advanced metrics, he still is ahead of Embiid in EPM, still has the higher true shooting percentage. And I don't want to gloss over what you said. He's over 70% true shooting. He doesn't have Embiid's volume, but that is the best true shooting percentage we've ever seen from a player that's scoring as much as Jokic, even if his scoring is down. More win shares, better box plus minus. His Raptor numbers, fewer turnovers, and touches the ball more, by the way. It's just he doesn't hold on to it. That's different. The touch time stuff is really interesting. Again, illustrating what you said about Jokic just gets off the ball when he's doubled and keeps it moving. I just think that if you're looking at value, the on-off stuff is actually the most persuasive to me, because the Nuggets are better with Jokic on the floor than the Sixers are with Embiid, and the total fall off a cliff when Jokic is not out there just shows like what he's working with, and how much more impressive it is that all of his on splits are as good as they are. So like, again, I think I say all this while acknowledging that if like there's every chance that Embiid just crushes these playoffs, destroys everybody, like this is, people have been talking about like he's due for that run. And if that happens, then picking Jokic for MVP, for the people that care about the playoff stuff, we'll just have all this ammo to say like, this guy's got 3 MVPs, and the guy that's finished second to him just proved to the world that he's the best player on the planet. Like there is a possibility that Jokic just carries the Sixers to the title, averages 40 and 15 rebounds and shoots 60%. Like that's in the cards. I don't think Jokic has that kind of run in him. So I think that this could look bad to a certain percentage of people that are thinking about the MVP debate, but I still wouldn't change my vote if Jokic flamed out in the playoffs and Embiid went on a run to a title. I would just start talking about Embiid the same way we talk about Giannis, where it's like, we kind of nudge each other and say, well, but Giannis is the best player, right? We agree on that. Like that's all that would change for me. So do you have any other, like, what's the argument? You made the argument for Embiid. I don't know where else you want to go with this, but like, certainly there's something to be said for Embiid that we haven't said, or there's more detractions to, fire at Jokic if you were so inclined.
Hot John Chili says, why does no one ever point out that Jokic is overbloated on our stats due to the fact that he never played without the 4 other starters on the floor? Because that's not true. So just like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, yeah, okay, if they're not going Jokic all bench units, I'm sure though there are absolutely minutes with that because some players have missed time this season, but you could go back and look at last season. We've seen Jokic go it alone. So I don't really, the bigger argument for the on-off splits being better, being inflated, or just that Denver is not good, like outside of the starting lineup. And so the fact that the Nuggets are deciding to play with their best players on the court, I don't know. I don't know how much I would just like ascribe to that. And also he's played, I think you don't look at it in larger groups. Like you want to break it up. Like he's played a ton of time without Jamal Murray this year. He's played time without Michael Porter Jr., of course. So I find that I don't think that's the sole reason that the on-off splits are better. And if you really want to get into it, I was probably stalling just to look this up. The Nuggets point differential is not great when Jokic plays without the 4 other starters on the court. But I want to know, like, what's Embiid if you're going to pull Harden, Maxey off the court, and Tucker? Like, I can't imagine that those are going to look even better. We do have a non-tuberculous saying we don't make any sense because every argument for Embiid is the same or better for Giannis. I don't necessarily buy that. I think the half court offense is harder pressed too. And that's the case with Giannis is the spottier jump shooting this year has been tough from him. And I think, the offense really improved from Milwaukee over the course of the season, but like he's not able to lift up an offense on his own the way that Embiid scoring can and the way that Jokic's passing can. If you want to pick Giannis, it's fine. I just don't know why we have to, I hate getting into this point where I'm just like, well, look, Giannis, I don't think he does this as well as does whatever. Right. Like, I don't think there's a clear cut case for your path is just saying you think Giannis is the best player in the league. He provides more two-way value than Embiid, for sure, which I guess is fine. I just the gap for them on offense, when you look at what Embiid is able to do right now, and then maybe not necessarily needing like a second guy as much to play a 2-man game. And, we don't absolutely know that because he did spend a lot of time with Harden this year. I don't know if anyone was impacted by how much the Sixers struggled in the end of the season when Harden missed a few games, and they looked pretty rough around the edges for that. I think the margins here are fairly thin. I just don't know that you can convince me that Giannis is the MVP, but I don't, boiling it down to Embiid, and Anon says this too, Embiid scores and plays D and it's dominant. Guess who's the better per minute and defensive player of the year and MVP candidate with the best record in the league? Again, like if that's going to be your case for Giannis, that's perfectly fine. I think there's probably been just more valleys than peaks from Giannis on offense than we're used to seeing. And I think the Bucks offense, if he's going to play without Drew, it bears it out in the statistics, if he's going to play without Drew or Middleton, both at the same time, I think I'm going to trust Jokic to anchor lineups without his 2 best teammates on offense. And Embiid, I'm going to trust him to anchor the offense without his 2 teammates more so than I'm going to trust Giannis at this point. That's not meant to be a knock on Giannis. It's just trying to split hairs in a discussion where it feels like it's so tight. I will say, I do think, and maybe we're guilty of this for not spending more time on him at the top, Giannis's case feels like it has just been sort of dismissed as, oh, this is down to Embiid and Jokic. And I don't necessarily think that is fair, because I actually think it was more difficult for me ultimately. I don't know if it was more difficult for me to go Jokic over Embiid or Embiid over Giannis, but it was pretty, like, that decision was tough as well. It wasn't just like, oh, this is just Embiid and Jokic's argument. The final thing I'll also say here, I already talked about at the top that I care about minutes played. We're talking about a few 100-minute gap between Giannis and these 2 at the top. And that, I think, certainly, even if you don't believe that Embiid has the more convincing 2-way argument over Giannis, in this MVP race and the way that I'm going to look at all the other awards, the minutes gap needs to matter.
Yeah, I think that's a big factor. And for me, like, maybe this is an oversimplification. And look, there are plenty of fair criticisms to throw at your alphabet soup catch-all metrics. Like, the defensive Raptor stuff for Jokic has always just been absurd, in particular. And some of his defensive box plus minus stuff is just like, we need to reevaluate how much stock to put in those numbers. But generally speaking, like EPM, I think is probably regarded as like the best catch-all going right now, and that's the one I lean on the most. And just to make the point, Giannis just isn't high enough in almost any of those. EPM in particular, if you go to estimated wins, which is the accumulated version of it, he's ninth, which is behind guys like Donovan Mitchell, Jimmy Butler, Dame, SGA. So in Jokic and Embiid are 1-2 pretty comfortably. Tatum grades out well there because of all the minutes he's played. He's played more than anybody else we've talked about. But Giannis just doesn't pass the initial. Do the catch-alls say, which by the way, any half decent catch-all is factoring in who you're on the floor with and like shooting luck and all that other stuff. So it's a pretty good way to just make entry into the conversation of who's provided the most value. Giannis just doesn't have the case based on those numbers. And then you get into the minutes, and then you get into, man, those turnovers are rough, and man, that jump shooting's bad, and man, his true shooting is down from, not that we are comparing Giannis this year to Giannis in years past, but certainly relative to the other guys, the numbers just aren't quite there. And I say that again for like the umpteenth time. I think he's the best player in the world, and I would pick him to start my playoff run. It's just, if we're talking about value for this year, Giannis. So it wasn't that hard for me to just almost confine this to Jokic and Embiid, because I think statistically those guys were just a cut above everybody else. And Giannis is third for me, like pretty easily, having said that. But I think there's a little bit of a drop for me.
And also the other stuff with Jokic, I should have mentioned to what Anand's point said before. A lot of the reason that the Nuggets are going to play all their starters with Jokic is that they don't trust their starters to play without Jokic. And so just like Aaron Gordon specifically, like that's someone that you're going to want on the court with Jokic a ton, because his offense was for much of the season, was very much predicated on what Jokic was able to open up for him. Back of the ballot, we both had Shea and Tatum 4 and 5. Luka falling off was kind of wild, but some of the defensive weirdness and then the minutes without Kyrie after the trade deadline where the Mavericks weren't very good. Wild to think that he probably led this race like for the first quarter of the season.
Yeah, when Dallas was up like 4th in the conference for a while there, and yeah, he had this elite. He was at least in the mix for like top 3, and I didn't even like remotely consider him before. Like Tatum was no question before him. SGA for me was no question before him. And then maybe you get down to 6, 7, 8. That's when I started to think about him. But yeah, it's wild. It's a rough season for him. I would say like going into next year, I don't know how you'd handicap it, but I think he probably should be top 3 in preseason odds for the MVP next year. But he's got to prove it now, because we've seen this was not a good year for Luka Doncic, even though statistically still it's just, you look at it and the numbers don't look real. Yeah, sure. He's perfectly happy. Nothing to worry about.
Shea's case is interesting. I think he shoulders so much of the offensive burden, and even more of it before Jalen Williams kind of took over some of it. Maintains his efficiency. The whole sort of Jimmy Butler progression of 3-point shooting, where he just doesn't really take them anymore, was weird. And he was shooting them well to start the season. Defenses just overreact him, and he got a lot better on defense this year. And the Thunder, this is not the baseline I'm using, but the Thunder outscored opponents by 150 points this season when Shea was on the court. And the Mavericks outscored opponents by 128 with Luka on the floor. So like, that's the type of season that Shea kind of had. I have him over Tatum just because, and this might be the bump of, am I penalizing Tatum for having a better supporting cast? The jump shot variability like scarred me a little bit for Jason Tatum. I think he's been solid defensively as always, but he doesn't impact the game in any one area as much as the other 4 guys that are in front of him right now. And if he was, part of that might just be by design, and he has gotten better as a passer, but this is not like, he's not the Shea Gilgeous-Alexander level drive the offense guy. And even if you want to think and this is a great point by F. Crate Retro in the chat, Tatum led for a little while too. When the Boston Celtics were out at gangbusters, I think Luka eventually they kind of usurped him, and then it might have been Luka and Tatum, and then people warmed up to the idea of, well, maybe Jokic can win 3 in a row. I don't know. And I would like to think that I'm not being impacted by stuff that I've read and heard throughout the season. I would also just like to know like how much of this does become narrative driven, because it's like Luka went from 1 to, I didn't do I did top 5 for MVP and stopped myself. Like you could throw other names in there, De'Aaron Fox or Sabonis. There's certainly James Harden's going to get some love there. There's Jimmy Butler in Miami might get some residual consideration. But like it's 5 spots. I left it at 5 here.
Yeah.
And that was my argument for like, I almost defaulted to Tatum 4th, but I'm just like, look at what the Thunder did with Shea. And are you going to argue to me that Boston has an inferior supporting cast to Oklahoma City? No, I'm not saying do I think Shea was better than Tatum this year was the other question. My answer is probably yes. I mean, like you
Yeah.
just look at there is only I think Trae Young and Doncic are the only higher volume players that get a fewer percentage of their buckets off assists, and that's Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is not the Trae Luka player where it's like, well, that's by necessity. That's the only way that you can play shit. No, that's not the only way that you can play Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. We've seen him get better playing off of Giddey as well, and then just coupled with his improvement defensively, your emphasis on the word valuable, because if I went by minutes strictly, but again, this is the back end of the ballot, Tatum would win by far and away in the minutes category.
Yeah.
I just think Gilgeous-Alexander was the more valuable player this year.
I think I agree with that. I think too, the contract, this is maybe a little bit of a niche argument, but you got to start to make some of these when you're talking about the difference between guys that are, I think, as close as Tatum and SGA. Like you mentioned the jump shot variability. I think that's a good way to phrase maybe what the true knock on Tatum is he's just not the guy. He's not undeniable all the time. Like sometimes his performance is subject to the jumper falling. He can be defended, I think, with enough length and size and strength sometimes to just, he's going to have bad, we've seen it, right? Gilgeous-Alexander is so different because he gets to the spot he wants every time. He's led the league in drives 3 years running. And now he's got this foul drawing craft and he's got these little short mid-range pull-ups, kind of like De'Aaron Fox has really excelled at this year, but just higher volume. So to me, the way Gilgeous-Alexander is able to just do what he wants, regardless of what the defense is trying to keep him from doing, is a real distinguishing factor between him and Tatum. And so like the numbers are what they are, but I just think anecdotally watching Gilgeous-Alexander, you're left constantly thinking like, what do you do with this guy? And I think that may be even bigger story in a playoff series once the Thunder eventually start making consistent postseason runs. Whereas Tatum, I don't ever feel, except when he's hot, you're like, what are you going to do with this guy? He can't miss. But it's not the same. It's not the same because the valleys are there with Tatum along with the peaks, and SGA is just so hard to stop. And I don't know, I don't know what that means for an MVP debate or what that does for value, but I think you just have to view that distinction as meaningful between those two. But that's all we need to say about 4-5.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say on it, to his credit, the fact that he's still fifth when he was statistically one of the worst off the dribble jump shooters in the league, I think says a lot about how much he has improved his overall comprehensive package.
Yeah, and Tatum will be a first-team All-NBA for me, by the way. So we're not just dumping on him.
Grant, you're ruining the second podcast.
That's okay.
Can we do something just a little bit lower stakes next? I'm exhausted from that discussion. Yeah. Let's go to Executive of the Year. What is I went 3 deep on this, and there's obviously honorable mentions, but who do you have here?
So I didn't think too hard about this one. I think I'm just going to go Kobe Altman. It was him and Danny Ainge, and I just snapped judgment Kobe Altman because he just went and got the guy in Donovan Mitchell, and suddenly the Cavs are, great, and everything feels awesome about that team. I think I'm going to go him over Ainge, and I didn't really think much beyond that. I think there's a lot of like your third guy could be as good as my 7th or 8th guy. So, but Ainge just, Jesus Christ, just getting Kessler for Gobert now looks like such a, it's such a fun thing. Everybody said it, but like you wouldn't trade Kessler to get Gobert back straight up. And there's all those picks involved and all the other. So, and getting Markin into, I think I maybe just talked myself into Ainge. I think I'm going to go Ainge. I changed my mind. It's not Altman anymore. So that's going to be it for me. To remake the Jazz in 2 really bold trades is such a big deal to me. So I gotta go with Ainge. Look how committed I am to these lower stakes awards. I talked myself out of one already.
So I had 4 candidates here, and it was Monty McNair of the Kings, Leon Rose, and the other 6 levels of front office structure that the Knicks have. Then Kobe Altman and Danny Ainge. I went with Kobe Altman. I think it's harder, and this is not a novel way to consider things. I think it's harder to make the Donovan Mitchell trade for Cleveland than it is combined in itself than it was for the Jazz to make the Gobert and Donovan Mitchell trades. Their teardowns, and I can't remember who said this. I think it might have been Kevin Pelton. The teardowns are always easier than the buildups. It's even if you have the license to go for it. Do you know who was putting their job on the line with the Donovan Mitchell trade, regardless of how well you thought the fit was? It was Kobe Altman. And I also think it wasn't a no-brainer decision for Cleveland to do it. Donovan Mitchell wanted to play for the Knicks. I know he has a ton of time left in his contract, but relationships and player happiness matter. He was thrilled when the trade was made right off the bat. I'm not saying he didn't want to go to Cleveland, I'm just saying it was, and they obviously had intel that we did not, but it was harder for them to make that decision, knowing the opportunity cost, knowing Evan Mobley's going into year 2 and Darius Garland was going into year 4. This was still a core that was very early in to its development, and the good vibes kind of fell off towards the end of last season. They injuries, of course, but like you needed to believe because that's your last. The Cavs have more financial flexibility than most teams in a position where their top 4 guys are all stars. But like their trade asset well is just like maybe you think Isaac Okoro has bumped up his stock a little bit. Okay, whatever. Isaac Okoro is not there's no the move you're making. The next big move you would make is a tear down if this doesn't work. And so
yeah.
I have Ainge too because I was like he got a haul. I wonder how much of that was like because the Rudy Gobert trade was first, and you look at it and you go, did Ainge like really negotiate the fuck out of that, or were the Wolves just so thirsty? Because I want to know that, like, who were they negotiating against? And so I don't want to discredit Ainge there, but I sort of thought like that was just not a trade. Like he could have been offered less, and there's no way you turn that trade down.
I think I agree. I think, and this cuts against what we said when the Gobert trade happened. I thought it made sense for the Wolves. I think what that trade ultimately says, it's more of a bad trade for the Wolves than it is a good one for the Jazz. But like just to echo what you're saying about how much credit does Ainge really get for that? Because I think you're right. I think the Wolves were new ownership group. Just we got to make a splash. Let's do it. And I don't think they were thinking super rationally, it turns out. But yeah, it's still a great trade for Ainge. So give me, who else did you have further down the ballot? You had McNair. What do you think? So McNair gets credit for drafting Keegan Murray and getting Malik Monk.
That Kevin Huerter trade was massive.
Kevin Huerter trade. That was another one though, where it was like, that was just a bad trade for Atlanta.
It was stupid, but I looked at it from the Kings. I'm like, you need to see more from this team before you're trading a pick. And then I started to learn more about the 2024 draft class. And by learn more, I mean like listen to Jonathan Givony and Adam Spinella on the draft. And everyone says it's not dog shit, but that it's not great. And then now they're good. So it's like, well, that pick is going to convey next year anyway. So it's perfect. But so making that move was not easy. I feel like I was like, am I bleeding over the Sabonis trade? Because there was an overcorrection of, I don't want to make this about this. I hate that I bring it up every time.
I know what you're going to say, and I agree with you.
I still wouldn't have done it. But I almost wondered, I was clearly wrong about the overarching vision of it in the first place. And so am I trying to, that's last year's business though, like last season's business. I viewed this as the single season award. So I probably would have had him 4th. The Knicks case is interesting. And I had sent you this, Schwinny Poo from the Strickland had sent a tweet that I guess I never viewed the draft day trade in this, but he said the Knicks traded the 11th pick for cap space, Jalen Brunson, which turned into Jalen Brunson, Isaiah Hartenstein, and then 3 protected first-round picks. There were other mechanisms in there where do you agree that, what they paid to getting out of that first round entirely, like to get off some of the contracts that weren't really terrible. If you believe Ousmane Dieng is a future 5-time MVP like I do, like you're still not going to feel great about the trade. What do those first-round picks turn into? But aside from that, just the Hartenstein signing ended up being good. There was some turbulence there. Having Jalen Brunson was the best free agency signing by far. And then the Josh Hart trade, I wasn't high on that to begin with, and that ended up working out really well for them. And then I killed the Mitchell Robinson contract, even though it's de-escalating. And now I'm looking at it like, hey, that's fine to get Jericho Sims on such a cheapo deal. So you could pick him or that front office, and I think that's fine as well. Boston with Brad Stevens, I thought about a little bit too. The Malcolm Brogdon trade ended up being really big.
That's such an easy trade, though. That like, I'm sorry to cut you off. That's just, I think you've gone a tier down now because those 4 guys have all done stuff where it was like, oh, those were there were some tough decisions there, I thought.
And then the 2 others I wanted to ask you about very quickly was the Brooklyn Nets, how you felt about like what they did to pivot out of the Kyrie and Kevin Durant stuff. I ultimately don't give them credit for allowing the inevitable.
Yeah.
And I do credit them for how they handled negotiations against the Suns, but that felt more like a Suns thing than a Nets thing, because I don't fully believe that the Nets would have been like, if the Suns said, we're not giving you Jay Crowder, that the Nets would have walked away from the table. I don't buy it.
Maybe not.
How do you feel about them?
I feel it's like when we were talking about Durant's MVP case, several weeks ago, when that was a semi-realistic thing, or I think that was the context we were talking about it in, but it was the idea of like, do you get credit for landing the plane after you flew it into a hurricane, right? Like how valuable is Durant for that? It's kind of, and I don't know how culpable Marks and the rest of the Nets front office is, but like they did put the team together with the personalities involved that that we all knew, preseason, we were like, this is the most combustible, highest ceiling, lowest floor, good team in the league. And so everyone involved in that process, Mark's chief among them, had reason to know like this mix we have is very volatile. And they did come out of it pretty well, having gotten Mikal Bridges and added all these picks and just sort of put themselves back on some firm footing, which is not that easy to do after you trade two, all-time superstar offensive players. So that one's hard for me. But I guess if you just look at like, they still have Ben Simmons on the team. That's not great. But if you just look at like where this could have gone, and how ugly it could have gotten and how protracted some of this could have been, pretty solid to get out of it with like a roughly clean slate other than Simmons and some pick equity. So yeah, it's not as clean of a case just because of like, you kind of made this mess and good job cleaning it up, but it still is, pretty solid job, I'd say.
And I gave
Who's your other guy?
I do think there's a tier down, but Philly's front office convincing selling James Harden on taking less, so that they could get that leads to not only Daniel House, who comes on like later in the year a little bit, PJ Tucker, but it also helps you with the DeAnthony Melton trade. Right. I like the Jalen McDaniels pickup still the middle of the year, but that, again, tier just other front offices that I tried to give consideration to. Dallas did not make the cut for this, unfortunately. Dallas and Portland fell just short.
Yeah, just a little bit. All right, what do we got next? What do we move on to?
I picked this one. What do you want to do for next one?
We did executive. Let's just do coach. I think that's going to be a pretty quick one, probably, at least on
we
mine.
spent almost 10 minutes on executive, so let's not spend that much on coach of the year. I'm waiting with bated breath on who your coach of the year pick.
Yeah, it's Mike Brown, right? I just don't even really have a close second. It has the Kings playing a totally different style that suits the personnel. Was a defensive coach by reputation coming in. That has not translated, but I think that's just all personnel because like we've talked about all year, they allow the right kind of shot profile. Basically, it's just their defenders just aren't physically good enough. So I think that the most important thing for me in a coach is to be adaptable and to look at what's on the roster and say, like, what's the best way for us to play? And I think Brown came in with a style plucked basically from the Warriors directly that suits the Sabonis as the hub and put shooting around him. It's not rocket science, but I think he's got those guys playing really hard, bought in, which is like never a given in Sacramento historically. And they've just been the most positively surprising team in the league. And that's mostly talent, but it's also the way that the talent has been organized and deployed. So that's just my nutshell case for Brown. And you're going to surprise me if you have somebody else.
Yes, I have Tom Thibodeau of the Knicks. Who was
not a bad case.
I was Miroslav Shook says in the chat to your previous show, Ben Simmons is the only guy in the Nets roster I wouldn't call likable. I don't really know much about him personally, and I'm always just reticent to comment on if he was battling mental health issues like this season, last season, like I would really feel for him. But it does not seem like he's gained like a ton of friends amongst his teammates. So I guess agree with that much.
He's got to be talking about him as a player, right? That's how I took it. As like, I don't like that contract and I don't like the player I have for that contract.
Oh, that's fine. And I would get that. And then the lack of growth where it's almost regression functionally.
Well,
I know there's injuries like that he's dealt with, but even before that in Philly. So I did have Mike Brown as well. And I don't know, someone pointed out in Discord, only half of this applies to Mike Brown, that coach of the year is so often who was the head of the most surprising team, which might be fair. And then also that we give too much love to guys that we don't know enough about. Also fair. I don't think Mike Brown falls into that latter category. No. I think this is someone we have evidence has changed as a coach based off like seeing what he did at his previous stops and then the time he spent with the Warriors being clearly, I would think, invaluable to what he's done now. I don't think anyone comes close to touching him. I do think, so other names, they did not make my top three that I considered. Michael Malone in Denver, the Nuggets were so good, but I don't know like how much and the fact that he does seem to have a good relationship with most of his players that aren't named Michael Porter Jr. anyway. Tom Thibodeau, I called for him to get fired 7 or 11 games into the season, whatever it was. I don't apologize for the take at the time. There was a measurable change in how he was coaching the team weeks after that. And they started playing better, which I think is a big thing. So maybe I was a little bit too quick to jump on that, but I was actually surprised. The Knicks fan base was who always generally hates me, I would say, was in love with me for like a couple weeks after that. It was such a surreal feeling. So I don't regret it, but clearly you want to talk about how much things can change. I thought he should be fired. The Knicks end up being a 5 seed in the East and have a great season. I also thought about Joe Mazzulla in Boston I don't think it's a given that you put this first-time coach in charge of things. He does skew smaller in part because of injuries and you're just good. So I thought about him. Mike Budenholzer doesn't seem to be getting any consideration. It's just Chris Middleton misses basically most of the year. And now you help change your defense. Yeah, it's the personnel, but to where you're just both protecting the rim and limiting 3-pointers. So I thought he deserved more. Taylor Jenkins in Memphis, I think his case might have been stronger before the John Morant stuff, because how much of just the behind that's more of a front office organizational thing. But my 2 and 3 on this ballot, and I'm wondering if either of these surprise you. FK Retro already spoiled one of them in the chat.
Yeah, that's my 2.
Mark Dagnall's number 3 for me. Job he did in Oklahoma City. I love how much he's willing to experiment, where it doesn't feel like I don't know what the fuck is going on here, but you can't predict. Maybe a little bit more this year. I can't figure out the Oklahoma City Thunder's like rotation like ever, basically. A lot of it's injuries, but he's so willing to experiment. How about some love to JB Bickerstaff is my number 2.
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
I think Bickerstaff. No, I think the 2 that really stood out to me are Bickerstaff and Budenholzer, that just aren't getting really mentioned enough. I wouldn't pick them to win. I do have Dagnall number 2, and just to add on to what you said, I guess you'd say that maybe the degree of difficulty in terms of like what are the expectations there are not that high compared to some of these other jobs. But if you watch the Thunder, they do play differently from most teams you see, and I think that is just a decision tactically from the head coach, where their drive and kick relentlessness is just or drive and kick to drive again, and just continue that until you get fouled or you get a layup or you get a clean 3. Like that's just, it's not easy to play that way, because you can just, it's easy to make bad decisions and force shots and not be patient enough to wait for that third attack to pay off. And defensively, they're similar. I mean, some of it is there's young guys and they all have stuff to prove, and you're going to get a lot of attention, intensity, focus, effort with that sort of player grouping. But the fact remains that this was a team that played really hard defensively, flew around all the time. They've got the top 2 guys in forward, Jalen Williams and Kenrich Williams. I know Jalen Williams is number 1 in charges by like a country mile, despite playing almost never relative to the other guys on that list. And Kenrich Williams is second. So they just like, there's so much. I've said buy-in like 3 times now, but isn't that a huge factor for a coach? And the reason most coaches get fired is they don't have buy-in anymore. So I think Dagnall strategically and in terms of like his relationships with players has been phenomenal. Will Hardy is the other one that I would just throw mention to.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Kind of similar case where it's like his willingness to just commit to Kessler as a starting center, not an easy decision early in the year necessarily, and to entrust Markkanen with the expanded role he's had, and they've had injuries, especially to the guard line. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a harder job than Dagnall had, but similar. So that's the other name I'd throw in there.
Well, he absolutely should. I think he has a case to be in the top 3. Just the Jazz were trying, the front office was actively trying to shut people down and end the season after the All-Star break, and it wasn't happening. And to your point about OKC, they are one of the best defensive team. There might be a little bit of drives amid chaos for them. They're one of the best defensive teams after missing a shot and committing a turnover. So you talk about buy-in. I feel like a lot of that has to do with buy-in. Teledan Hogan says, nice explanation of your takes. It helps that I agree completely. Bad mouthing any of those guys is disingenuous, uninformed. Why isn't Malone in the coach of the year discussion? I kind of briefly talked about this. I feel like there's an element of Nikola Jokic is responsible for everything happening in Denver.
Yeah.
And I want to say this in defense of Michael Malone. The things I had to dig more into this as the season went on, because I'd seen it amongst Denver media and talking to some people like from the Denver media. I feel like he's probably dropped the ball with like how he's handled Michael Porter Jr. It doesn't seem like he trusts him at all. But when they complain about his rotations, I get some of it, but then I'm just like, what are the alternatives there?
What's he supposed to do? That's
right.
tough.
And so I think there's stuff he could have done differently with their lineups, but like, I think for the most part, with the personnel that he's been given, like they've done exactly what they needed to do. I will say, does the end of season sort of slough off like hurt him at all? I do find it surprising though, because we normally talk about, the coaches and the best teams are all mentioned. And, we didn't go through Doc Rivers. We didn't mention him for Philly, but like basically all 5 of the top 5 teams in the league, we mentioned their head coaches. Like we're even the top 6 teams in the league. So I do think he probably deserves a little bit more consideration. I don't view him as, I don't want to say a driving force. That's rude. I just don't think his case is as sturdy or strong as I would say at least the top 4: Will Hardy, Mark Daignault, JB Bickerstaff, and our ultimate winner, Tom Thibodeau. Just kidding.
I think I just you made me think of another point though. Just quickly before we move on, I think if you do want to, we treated Brown like he's just the open and shut case. I mean I think that's true. But if you wanted to elevate Daignault or somebody else, I think the point you'd make is that the Kings' best players were insanely healthy this year, and so in terms of some of the things that make coaching difficult, which is rejiggering your lineup when a key guy is out, or having to really mess with rotations or figure out how to compensate when you don't have this guy or what's like, he just didn't have to do that because everybody that mattered on the Kings played 70 something games and just never missed long stretches. So that makes his job a little easier, I guess, compared to a team with more young players or more injuries or whatever. But I still, even with that said, I still think Brown deserves it. So
I've actually picked our first 2 awards. Do you want to pick which award we go to next?
What do we even have? Oh, should we do Defensive Player of the Year?
That's a harder one. I think I'm going to end up clipping that as the segment from this pod. I do. For anyone listening first time, I will put short segments from each episode up. This is the one. I think I struggled over it just as much maybe as MVP. But so what does your ballot look like for Defensive Player of the Year?
It was harder for me.
You have the wrong answer. I'm going to tell you right now. No.
This is one where I am so ready to be swayed. I didn't go real deep considering multiple down ballot guys. I think just there's so many so for me from 3 to 14 on my ballot. Just looking at when I was putting
14 player.
No. I was just looking at when I put together all defensive. And I was thinking as I'm doing that, I'm like, oh, that guy deserves some rec. Oh, what about that? And so suddenly I'm way down the list. I really did just confine most of the research to Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brook Lopez. Those were kind of my 2. Again, this is a little bit like the MVP thing where acknowledging that I'd probably pick Draymond Green to anchor my defense if I were starting a playoff series. That's just a different question. So for me, I just started it with rim protection because we're talking about bigs. I think bigs, it's established, are just more valuable and important to a defense than wings and certainly smaller guards. So I started with rim protection, and the numbers are really similar. Jackson inside 6 feet, 51.2% defensive field goal percentage. Lopez is at 51.7. Kessler is the other guy in that 51 club. Not a consideration for me, but he's 51.6. The difference for me, so all great rim protectors, right? That's not news. The difference for me is how Jackson impacts, and he's my pick, by the way. I'm going to spoil it now. The difference for me is how Jackson impacts shooting elsewhere on the floor. And that just speaks to his mobility, which is something that Lopez just doesn't quite have. Lopez is kind of a genius at his limited role and what he does, but the way Jackson can move, the way he can hold up on switches, the way he allows you to play different coverages if you really need to, that Lopez is more limited in, that's a factor. And just to support that a little bit, so with Jackson on the floor, opponents shoot 8.8% worse at the rim. Lopez knocks that down by 6.3%. Both awesome. The difference for me is from short mid-range, Jackson drives down field goal percentage by 2.9%. With Lopez in the game, it goes up by 3.4%. There's noise, there's variance, but Jackson is limiting shots further from the basket. Move all the way out to all mid-rangers. Jackson knocks down opponent field goal percentage by 3.5%. With Lopez on the floor, opponent mid-range percentage from all mid-range areas goes up about 1%. So I think isolation, the numbers favor Jackson. The on-off stuff is too similar to even mention. Their impacts are super similar. So for me, it's the rim protection is kind of a wash, and it goes to Jackson because of his ability to be disruptive off the ball, his ability to defend in space, and his ability to affect opponent scoring elsewhere besides the rim. So it's close. I'm really curious to see who you have, or if you went about deciding in a different way. And the minutes thing is an issue too with Jackson. I should mention that too. The minutes and the fouls are a problem. Wasn't enough to dissuade me from all just the incredible impact he has on opposing shooters. So I'll give the floor to you if you've got something else that I didn't get there.
his case is just, it's so strong when you look at it. I don't know if this benefits or hurts him, but the percentage of his fouls that are offensive fouls should help his defensive player of the year case, but it also contributes to limiting his availability on the floor. I did not go with him. And I honestly thought about not even having him on top 3 to be super consistent with my minutes. But like I said, the back end of my ballot, I was going to go to most outstanding. I think he has been per minute the most outstanding defensive player. I have Evan Mobley as my defensive player.
Oh, wow. I love it. Let's hear it.
I thought a lot about this. And so Brook Lopez is my number 2. He came closest. Draymond would be my number 4. I thought about putting him over Jaren Jackson Jr. I don't know what to do about Draymond, just to be honest with you.
Yeah.
He is so transcendent on the defensive end. I think when you start to, you can toggle the numbers and you know that the Warriors, they can be great defensively with him on the court, but they've just not had it this year on the road. I do think that he's been part of those problems at some point, but like even when he's playing without Andrew Wiggins, they have a defensive rating in the 87th percentile this season. Like that's a really big deal. And like Looney hasn't been as good this year as he was last year either. I'm anxious. I can't wait for the playoffs though. When we find out, people are just like, well, how are they supposed to play with Kevon Looney? And he just becomes like, people are like, oh yeah, he's one of the most switchable bigs in the world. It's totally fine. They're even in the 82nd percentile of defense when he's playing without Looney and Andrew Wiggins. I don't know if I'm shortchanging him there. He has played a shit ton of minutes too, way more than Jaren Jackson Jr. Mobley though has played like almost 1,000 minutes more than Jaren Jackson Jr. at this point. He contests a higher percentage of opponent shots along the floor than Jaren Jackson Jr. at the basket. Contests a higher percentage of opponent shots at the basket, while I would argue having just as much, if not more, responsibility away from the basket. And when you look at the rim protection numbers, Jaren Jackson Jr. better. Brook Lopez, whose case was way more compelling than I really thought, and I'll get into that very quickly in a second. Yes, they're better statistically as these opponents shoot worse against them at the basket. For what everything else that Mobley does, he was more available by far than Jaren Jackson Jr. The Cleveland Cavaliers, I don't know what the final standings were, but like they were first in defense for a little bit. And I think Memphis eventually finished there, but it wasn't just like Memphis was this incredible. No, Cleveland finished first for the year. Some of the on-off data can be wonky, but they were in the 93rd percentile of defensive efficiency when he played without Jared Allen. And when I look at, again, I don't want to give too much of a, look at the supporting cast bump. Look at who's playing in front of him. You have Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, both have been fine defensively. Karis LeVert, been fine defensively this year. But like aside from Isaac Okoro, there's not, and depending on how you feel about Lamar Stevens, like this isn't a team that's like he has a ton of perimeter defensive help around him. Jaren Jackson Jr. has Dylan Brooks. Brook Lopez.
I'd throw Bane in there a little bit too.
Bane as well. That's
way
great.
Way more messes to clean up for Mobley for sure.
And then also like we know Brook and Giannis have Drew Holiday, and then Brook has Giannis and Holiday. Draymond, I said, had Wiggins and Looney, and also GP2 doesn't really count there.
DiVincenzo played good defense this year. I mean, I got you.
And just like I know Jared Allen's on this team, and you think Jared Allen is just a far superior player to Evan Mobley at this point. You've made that clear. I don't know if I'm a year early on this or a few years early on this. I honestly think that he has been overlooked because people are so quickly, and I'll say this to me about myself. I won't consider sophomores anymore. Like I'm not picking Trey Murphy for most improved player. I won't do it. We expect a year-over-year leap there. I even think third-year players have to really sell me on it. Fair or not. But I think if he was in year 3, year 4, and had this exact same season, that he probably would have won. And maybe I'm a year. I would trust Jaren Jackson Jr. more as sort of this passing lane guy because it feels like he has more of the comprehensive package. And the Grizzlies defense was so bad before he came back. And you look at the numbers, by the way, when he plays without Steven Adams and Dylan Brooks, defense is still elite. Let's round down. 900-minute gap. 900 minutes. That's a huge gap. And you could talk me out of it. And I would say that this is the award that I'm least, like if I had a vote, an official ballot, the reason that I would consider not accepting it is I don't know that I would feel qualified to pick a defensive player of the year. Just flat out.
Give yourself a little more credit.
But I have Evan Mobley and Brook Lopez's case, so I throw it back to you. I understand that like he can only play in so many ways relative to the others. He can come up a lot higher than people give credit for. And I credit his like stance, which is just like, he kind of looks like a giraffe. He has like that kind of center of gravity with his stances, but also the base defense, you take Holiday and you take Giannis off the floor, it holds up. You take Holiday off the court for the most part, it holds up. That's a big fucking deal. And I also think it speaks to your point. If you're going to start with rim protection and build your way out from there, that's probably the biggest case against Mobley. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But like, if Brook Lopez is just going to hold up in all those different situations, excuse me, I know he has Drew Holiday for a lot of those minutes, but holy shit, like that, his case was more compelling. I went into it thinking I was going to have Draymond and then it'd be Brook versus Jaren for number 3. And then I said, well, I think he deserves it. And it's tough because I sometimes don't believe he's the best defender on his team, but I also thought that was the other Giannis for MVP case that was weird. It felt like there was a month, 6-week stretch where like Giannis just didn't have it there either. And that's like, I just might be looking to split hairs that don't exist at this point, but that's where I ended up.
No, I think for me, if I had approached it like you did, where the volume mattered like it does for MVP, again, the MVP case was different because the two guys we considered were basically equal in playing time for all intents and purposes. So that didn't factor in, and even though that's the one place it would have factored in for me. Defensive player of the year, if I had gone with volume, I don't know how I could have picked Jackson, just because of, like you said, that, I mean, there's so many guys that are close, but that played way more. And so just in terms of cumulative impact, it wouldn't have made sense to pick Jackson. I just kind of set the threshold, and I guess this is more of like a story of the season where the per minute whatever tells it more so than the volume does. I will say though that for Mobley, like the rim numbers that threw me. They aren't as good as these other guys. The other
Still
thing
sub
though,
60 though, I will say.
Right. He's not bad. It's just these other guys were ridiculous. That I will say that, like, so I don't use this number for a lot of stuff, but ESPN's RPM, Mobley leads the league in defensive RPM by like a considerable.
Oh, does he? I didn't even look at RPM this year.
Yeah, I
didn't take that into account.
I don't use it much. Well, that's the thing I don't use it much because you get some wonky results from it, that even more so than Raptor, I think sometimes. So I don't know where it is on my hierarchy of catch-alls that I like. It's not super high, but there are at least numbers out there that say Mobley is absolutely worthy of what you're giving him award wise here. Is there anybody else? I have a couple guys I wanted to just mention here as I look back at my all defensive stuff. Alex Caruso leads the league in defensive estimated plus minus. Just throwing that out there.
He played a lot too.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I think a lot of people weren't paying attention to what was happening in Chicago, but he played a decent amount this year.
I
also
think Anthony Davis too deserves mention, but he gets crushed by he played like one more game over my cutoff threshold, so he's by far I didn't remotely think about him for DPOY, but like had he played more, I think it would have been a closer question.
I think the other one that I would mention, and I do think their end of season sort of demise on defense, and I know there was some wonky shooting in there. I think Bam Adebayo again had a hell of a defense season. Maybe not as good as last year. His case was stronger. He might have been fourth on my bet, or fifth, because I have Draymond fourth. But yeah, I was surprised he wasn't mentioned. Basically, him and Mobley didn't seem like they were in this at all. It just basically came down to, oh, is it going to be Jaren or Brook Lopez, or could Giannis? Like, I felt like Giannis was even talked about more than Bam, that's fine. But I just thought Bam and Evan Mobley both kind of flew under the radar here.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, like, again, it's a little bit like the Draymond thing where Bam is probably higher on my list of guys that if I'm starting a playoff run as my defensive anchor, I want him. And Mobley probably grades out pretty well by that sort of calculus too, because the case you made for him in a lot of ways comes down to mobility. Because I based a lot of my pick for Jackson over Lopez on Jackson can just do more in space, and I value that. Mobley is even better. Like Mobley is a truly like a special big in space. He as just rotating, just making rotations right like a guard does, just switching off to different matchups throughout the course of a possession, being totally fine against guards and wings. Like that's, I think for me, when we flash forward a year and we're talking about Mobley again, I think what we'll talk about is like, this guy is one of the best big defenders in space we've ever seen. Like, I think that's where he's going to get next year. And this will be not a harder case for you because you just gave him DPOY, but I'm going to have to really evaluate that next year.
Does your gut, and I won't take it personally, does it feel like I'm a year or two early on the Mobley for DPOY case?
I think statistically it feels a little, but like I'm going to have a more ridiculous take on some other awards. So I'm not going to jump down your throat on that one. It feels a little early, but then that's a dumb narrative argument, right? Either he's deserving based on his performance and numbers, or he's not. And I think with the exception of some of the rim protection stuff, he is deserving, but I think Jackson was just so disruptive and so impactful.
I think what changed a lot for me too is like B-Ball Index has these fantastic, just specific stats that you can go into, like pick and roll coverage versatility. And Evan Mobley grades out almost as well as Jaren Jackson Jr. in that. Jaren Jackson Jr. grades out as more versatile. And it's just like the 900+ minute gap is just going to mean something to me when it's close like that.
Yeah. If I had thought about minutes like you did, I think my results probably would have been different.
You alluded to some ridiculous takes, which I think means that we need to go to Rookie of the Year.
Yeah. We got to do this. So I'm fully prepared for you to just talk me out of this. So I picked Jalen Williams. And I want to acknowledge first that, so this is what this argument comes down. First of all, I don't know what the fuck the criteria are for Rookie of the Year. Because a lot of people seem to pick the guy that, when we look back, we're going to want to make sure that we pick the guy that has the highest ceiling or something. Like that seems to be a component in this award that I guess I understand. But that I don't like. Didn't Malcolm Brogdon win Rookie of the Year? Am I imagining that? And like, that was a weak class and he was, not a lottery pick. And that, looking back on that, it feels weird. Maybe he was all rookie. Anyway, like I think
he was Rookie of the Year. Wasn't that the Joel Embiid season?
Oh yeah. There were some extenuating circumstances there. So it's a little weird, but I feel like in not picking Banchero, I feel like I have to sort of do some gymnastics. But anyway, so for me, Banchero's shooting is just like too bad for me to dismiss. As well, his role is harder. He's being asked to do more. I think that's all true, but we're just talking about a guy that was like, he was one of the just least effective jump shooters specifically in the league this year. And so if we just harp on efficiency and we like fetishize it with every other award we talk about, and Banchero does get to the foul line a lot, which is great. I think that augurs well for his future. I still think that he could be a number one scorer on a good offense. He sort of was that for an Orlando Magic team down the stretch that was basically a 500 team or slightly better over the last, 60 games maybe. Mm-hmm. So I just think that he didn't score it well enough this year, efficiency wise, for me to discount, or for me to like just overlook the numbers. So just a couple things. And I've mostly been bashing Banchero because I feel like you have to tear him down in order for Williams' case to make any sense. So I think Williams right now today is a better player than Banchero. He's older. That's fine. That affects your projection of them going forward. For Rookie of the Year, I think how they performed this year matters. And that's where Kessler's case gets crazy because he was statistically the best rookie. And I'm just not going to do that. But so if your argument is, well, Banchero's role is harder, it drove his efficiency down, all this other stuff, I think it's persuasive that Williams, with him on the floor without Shai Gilgeous-Alexander or Josh Giddey, so Williams is the primary ball handler, facilitator, playmaker, scoring option in these sets. The Thunder were plus 1.9 net rating with a 116.6 offensive rating. Banchero on the floor, even if you give him Fultz as a helper, I guess, basically all lineups with Banchero on the floor, they're minus 3.9 and their offensive rating is 112.8. I don't know if you can make the case that a Thunder lineup without Giddey or SGA has more talent offensively than Banchero was surrounded with in Orlando. Just generally speaking, you've got Franz Wagner, you've got Wendell Carter. Their guards suck. They can't shoot, but still, I think that skews in favor of Orlando in terms of surrounding talent. And the Thunder just scored more efficiently with Williams as the primary guy. And so if you think Williams, if the case depends on, well, Williams is, he needs to be a primary scoring option to sort of compete with Banchero because that role is the most important. Like he stacks up pretty well. I mean, he's better than him statistically. I'm not saying that's the be all end all, but what does it for me in addition to that is I think Williams might be just the most scalable rookie I can ever remember seeing because he is essentially a big point guard who has a monstrous wingspan and can guard multiple positions and can play make and can shoot it. He's 60.1% true shooting, which is like, as a rookie, that's just unbelievable. And he was better down the stretch after the All-Star break than he was before it. So he's angling up trend wise. Williams has a higher box plus minus, estimated plus minus, more win shares, higher PER, and again, all angling up after the All-Star break than Banchero. So you really got to focus on the roles being different, I think, to give Banchero the Rookie of the Year award. And to me, there just wasn't enough that didn't matter enough to offset all the other stuff that I think favored Williams. So I realize that's going to be an unpopular take, and I'm sure there are great arguments against it, many of which you will present. I just think I can't get past the shooting. I can't get past the shooting for Banchero, and the role stuff just doesn't persuade me.
So you almost have me convinced. I will say I didn't think I was going to come into this being able to be convinced at like all, but here's my thing. Paolo also had a very strong closing kick to the season. 42% on threes over his last whatever game was it? Over his last 15 games. 20 points, 4.3 assists. You look at when you break down, yes, some of the advanced metrics favor Williams. Paolo Banchero's usage was almost 10 points higher than Jalen Williams, and they had about the same turnover rate. The way that he's able to take control care of the ball, the way that he gets to the foul line, 0.76 free throw attempt rate, almost double that of what Jalen Williams has. And a part of that could be, well, look at how much he had the ball in his hands. That's also sort of my point here. I will say what was also a surprising differentiator, and I want to make this clear, is I don't think this is the case to pick him. Paolo Banchero was not as bad defensively as I think most people would have expected. And I don't think that Jalen Williams spent enough time against the higher tier players to just be like, well, look at how much more valuable he was on Paolo Banchero than that. Paolo Banchero had better hands than I thought. He switched better than I thought. Jalen Williams, better on defense. Sure. I just don't know if it was, when you look at the role difficulty and that the efficiency wasn't worse. I mean, people are up in arms because he shot 47.1% on twos. Look at the shots that he was taking. That's with his jump shooting percentage sort of just pulling that all the way down. And so you're looking at a guy who's also going to draw more types of coverage when he gets closer to the basket. He shot well inside of 3 feet, like his percentage at the rim, I was just absolutely fine with. And there were spurts and moments and stretches where you saw that the jumper could work. And I don't know what I'll think about him as a 3-point shooter moving forward, but do we also, should we be pretending that Jalen Williams took a shit ton of 3-pointers this year and is just thus the better shooter? He averaged 3.2 3-point attempts per 36 minutes. That's fewer than Paolo Banchero. I'm going to respect volume, which was also low for Paolo Banchero from there. They are clearly the 1 and 2 for me, despite what the metrics say about Walker Kessler.
Right. Should we talk about Kessler a little bit? Because there are going to be some very smart people that say he's the rookie of the year. Why is he not? Like, I agree he's not, but why is he not?
How many minutes did he even end up playing for the season? And I understand that. So he ends up with, for the year, 1703 is actually more than I thought it was going to be at. But you have Jalen Williams ends up at, how close is that to Jalen? He was at 23, and I think Paolo was even higher than that. Paolo was at 24 and a half. So that's just not, this is what it boils down to. Did Walker Kessler provide enough value defensively to offset just kind of the net neutral that he is on offense, which is just, he's a play finisher. And these other two guys, I would say Paolo Banchero is more of an advantage creator. And then Jalen Williams he's not a play finisher. Like, they put the ball in his hands a ton. And that was the other thing that differentiated them. I don't think this is a role difficulty thing. I think there's more versatility in the way that Paolo Banchero can attack. I think Jalen Williams definitely needs to get going downhill more or be off the ball, where Paolo Banchero could slow down, survey set defenses, go up against more doubles. And I ultimately think that was the difference. But I don't think, I get the statistics, but you then have to just say, I'm picking every award by what the stats just say.
Yeah,
like,
by
I'm
what
not factoring
EPM
in playing
tells me.
time.
Right.
Yeah. Like, is there even a case for him to just be like, oh, he should be 2? I don't see it.
It's easier for me to see him being 2. Like, you just can't, the role, it's a different role. It's just, he might win defensive player of the year once or twice, over the next decade or whatever. And then we'll do the same thing where we say, yeah, but like in the playoffs, this is a Gobert situation. And, he may provide that. The numbers may say he's providing that kind of value. And by the way, like, it's not actually that close. Just using EPM, using Dunks and Threes EPM, and you filter it for estimated wins, which is cumulative, which gives, guys that play more a boost. He's at 5.9 estimated wins added. Williams is second at 4.1. And then Banchero's all the way down at 3.4. So it's almost like, and Banchero's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th. I just can't do it. I can't. Awesome defensive player, way better than anybody thought. Talking about Kessler, on offense, he's okay at what he does, but what he does is like 2 things. I think so. Let me ask you this. Do you think that Banchero, because this is the argument for Banchero, I think in some respects, Banchero's ceiling is he's a Jason Tatum type that's way better already around the basket because he's bigger and stronger and already has more foul drawing craft than Tatum does, like maybe right now, or at least it took Tatum like 4 or 5 years to develop. So Banchero's ceiling is he's maybe all NBA first team because he is a first option scorer that is just physically over. Like that's the thing, right? Like, does that, and Williams, I guess, is not viewed that way. I wonder if we would think differently if Williams didn't have SGA on his team this year and had to do a lot more initiating. Does that matter to you? Just this idea that Banchero has the ceiling of being the rarest type of player, whereas I guess we've decided Williams doesn't, even though I don't know if that's right to say yet.
No, again, if you wanted to use it as just sort of this marginal tiebreaker, yes. But I think to do that, that's the wrong way to go about it, because that is going to discredit how much Jalen Williams might still grow. Did you think Desmond Bane was going to be this crazy off the dribble creator after year one?
Yeah,
I didn't think he was going to do it after last year. Yeah. And look at what he's doing this year. So I think that would be unfair to Jalen Williams. You had me so close to just remember we talked about what are the odds that Dan's going to say, I'm actually going to flip flop here at the last minute on this pocket. You had me so close to flip flopping. So,
I'm afraid that's the best I got. I don't think I have any other takes that are that ridiculous. Although some of my all NBAs are kind of iffy, but we're not doing that yet. So
that's a great teaser. If you're for all the person that's watching us at the moment still after an hour and 15 minutes, check out that podcast, which is coming. We have one more major award here. Although, did you have a pick for this clutch player of the year very quickly?
I didn't think about it much because it's just De'Aaron Fox. I mean, most clutch points, their clutch record's ridiculous, and it's all him just getting to 12 feet away and making shots. That's how the Kings win late.
Is there like anyone else that, if you weren't to pick a De'Aaron Fox, that you would have thought of as just for that award?
I'm gonna do this without pulling up the clutch stats. I think Jalen Brunson probably should be someone that gets some consideration.
My favorite.
Who else has been? No, do you have somebody? I'm not going to pull up the clutch stats because I wanted to go off the top of the head there.
I think DeRozan would still have a case.
Always,
I think
right?
I think Shea would be 2 for me. Would probably be second on my ballot. If we do, and I'm only pulling these up now, so it just loaded. If we went by clutch win player probability added from Impredictable, De'Aaron Fox leads the league by it's not even close.
Yeah.
Joel Embiid is 2. Jimmy Butler's 3. DeMar is 4. Bam is 5. Tyrese Halliburton is 6. Defensive player of the year favorite Evan Mobley is 7. Sabonis is 8. Tyler Hero is 9. Larry Markkanen's 10. And Shea was 11. So at least Shea doesn't look like a terrible pick.
Yeah.
Jokic checking in number 13. But that's another vote of confidence for Embiid if he would finish second in clutch win probability.
I think the through line for a lot of those guys is just can you make short jumpers and or get fouled a lot? Like that is what you need in the clutch, it seems like, because a lot of those guys have that same skill set. Do you want to do we've got most improved and sixth man. Do you want to
we have 2 left. Let's do you want to do sixth man?
Yeah, you can lead that off. I think we're going to agree though.
I don't know that we are. I thought unless you changed your pick from last time.
I can't remember what I said last time.
I went, oh my God. This is the one that I want to change. And I did change it when I submitted it to Bleacher Report. I asked our editor, Brian Knox, 3 hours later. I was like, hey, can I change my pick? I'm not even kidding. I went with Malcolm Brogdon. Emmanuel Quickly is clearly number 2. Number 3 for me, I had, let me go to my ballot here. I already forgot because this is one. I had Malik Monk actually for number 3. I don't think he's going to get a lot of third place votes. It's not just, I think a lot of people are like, oh, he's the typical points per game guy. His outside shooting was all over the place this year. He was so good inside the arc. He was so good as a passer off drives. The chemistry he got with Sabonis, I think he was more valuable than just a microwave scorer. Other names I considered very quickly. I had Onyeka Okongwu and Bogdan Bogdanovic both for Atlanta. I just felt like the Hawks' depth wasn't really good enough, and Bogdanovic missed a bunch of time, but those were 2 names where I was like, if they played more, I might have picked one. Tyus Jones, Alec Burks, Norman Powell, Larry Nance Jr., Bobby Portis, Austin Reeves, and Cole Anthony. So I had 11 players that I considered for sixth man of the year. Did I miss anyone egregious there?
Do I have anybody else besides that? No. Well, Austin Reeves. I mean, like that's someone
I did say him. if it's any.
Oh, did you? That is great consolation to me, and makes me feel bad about being a bad listener.
No, you're great. Did Dante DiVincenzo end up starting too many games? How many minutes did he end up playing?
I don't know what his qualifications would have been. I mean, he's been helpful. He started a lot. I mean, because Wiggins missed whatever it was, 20 some odd games. He's just not quite on the level. DiVincenzo's a guy that if the three ball is falling, you're like, this guy is a starting shooting guard in the NBA for a good team. And then if it's not, all the defensive
he started half his games, which isn't that like the exact cutoff? You have to start like more less than half your games.
I think so. I don't know if it might not be a straight 50-50 split. We should know this, but
it is a straight 50. His is 72 games played, 36 of them came as a starter. Which does lead me into the Brogdon versus Quickley thing.
Okay.
I understand when you're looking at the stats in totality, I think the case would be Immanuel Quickley, just right off the bat.
That's my pick, by the way, just to put that out there.
When you start to separate it, Malcolm Brogdon was better in the games that he came off the bench. And so from there, you have to ask, and I saw this argument being made on Nick's Twitter, and it's not one that I've actually seen. I feel like people find new ways to talk about the award every year, which is fine. Isn't part of the role of sixth man stepping in to the starter spot when you need to be thrown into there? And so I get that. But then you get into murky territories like, well, then why isn't Alex Caruso still eligible if he had to start so many games because the Bulls were so banged up? I just can't ascribe too much to that. I do think it's unfair to say Quickley's case entirely is just built off, look at everything he did as a starter. He is, I think, more valuable defensively when you look at his screen navigation, the level of assignments he handles. But I also kind of feel like we just forgot how good Malcolm Brogdon was for much of this season. The efficiency from the outside is better. If you like Quickley's creation inside the arc more, I think that's fine. Brogdon does give you more positional versatility on defense, even though he's not the same level of active as Quickley. I already kind of alluded to the three-point shooting is off the charts. He did well running the offense too. When you look at him playing without Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in Boston, the Celtics were actually outscoring opponents. When you pull Randall and Brunson from the Knicks and play Quickley, the Knicks were actually outscored during those minutes. Now, in just bench minutes specifically, Immanuel Quickley is your leader in plus minus for the NBA. So I will say that. I think a lot of that could be a testament to the entire Knicks bench, but I'm trying to point out the flaws in my case here. If you went straight, and I don't know if this needs to be factored 6 minutes a year, who's more important to their team? Should Immanuel Quickley win the award? To me, I think a lot of people will be like, well, Immanuel Quickley is going to be more likely to close games for the Knicks. And I think when you look on paper, okay, yes, in theory, sure. But when you look at clutch minutes played this year, like, don't even worry about like whether he started these games or not, but that could be part of it. Immanuel Quickley, 115 minutes. Malcolm Brogdon played and was much more efficiently 90 minutes in the clutch. Is that like a big enough difference? I think there's an argument to be made. Sure. Like if Immanuel Quickley's on the floor during higher leverage moments, and the number of clutch games certainly needs to factor into there. I didn't actually look at that to see like how many clutch games did Boston play in relative to, so there was 24 appearances in the clutch for Brogdon versus 34 for Quickley. And so like that's going to skew the sample in itself. I just think wire to wire. And this was not Immanuel Quickley was not this player to start the season either. Wire to wire, I think Malcolm Brogdon has been the most valuable reserve in the NBA. And that hurts. I wanted to pick Quickley, and there's a case. You picked him.
I did. I don't have a lot to add. I think what it came down to for me is that I think the best arguments against Quickley, or some of the best, as you mentioned, are he sort of is getting penalized for being really awesome as a guy in a bigger role than a typical six man would play, whether he's starting or closing or whatever that ridiculous like triple or double overtime game was, where he was the best player on the floor down the stretch. And he's like, Brogdon doesn't have these occasional massive scoring outburst nights like Quickley does. And that's just because Brogdon just doesn't tend to get the share of minutes that Quickley does when slotted into a starting role or just a higher leverage, higher volume role. That just doesn't, to me, feel like a great argument against a guy's six-man case, because I do think just the fact that he's capable of, filling that larger role is like it's a feature. Yeah. It's not a bug in the case. It's a positive. So Brogdon does just feel like the purest six-man pick because he just was a bench player all year and he just fits the role It's always a guard. It seems like six men just have to be combo guards. That's just in addition to the yay points 6-man thing. It's also the position seems to be a real consistent factor. But yeah, I have quickly. I have no qualms at all with the Brogdon pick. I think it's a lot like MVP, where it's like just reasonable minds can differ. I think either of those two guys is a totally justifiable selection.
Shout out to, do you know who I wanted to not necessarily pick, but I really wanted to vault up, and maybe I should have. I didn't mention him in my initial 11. Nas Reed need to be in
Yeah.
there.
I'll tell you what, if you just took the version of Nas Reed that played against the Warriors, he wouldn't be 6-man, he'd be MVP this year.
Final award is, what do we have left? Most improved player.
Most improved.
I think we're going to differ on this too. We've had some variance in this podcast, which is good.
I don't think we are. And we'll see. It depends on how consistent you are, because something you said or reminded me of, because I kind of like tend to think this way too, but I had forgotten about it when I was thinking, or I disregarded it a little bit when I was thinking about most improved. You said some version of the jump from good to great is just different and more valuable than like good to very good, or, decent to good. And so that's why I went with Gilgeous-Alexander. I realize he's been awesome in the past, but you really did like, doesn't that matter? Doesn't the good to great jump just matter more than it? So he went from being a guy that, was an awesome offensive player, really hard to stop as a scorer. Again, I said, it's not, this leading league in drives is not new for him. This is the third year in a row, but he's fourth on our MVP ballot. And the jump from all-star caliber to that is just the hardest jump that there is. So, Larry Markkinen, I get it, man. Like the growth he showed as an on-ball scorer, as an isolation scorer, as more than a spot shooter, as a guy that went from, he's going to score in the teens on a good team to a guy that's just going to average 25 and be a first option. That's shocking. But it's just, he's not on Gilgeous-Alexander's level. And I'd say the leaps that they made, from starting point to end point are kind of similar in size. It's just the SGAs on that spectrum are like further to the right. To use a great illustrative tool for people listening to this, imagine a spectrum line and imagine anyway. So I think that's just, you swayed me on that ultimately. Whenever you said that a few weeks ago, that made up my mind.
I had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander obviously too. When you just look at the statistical jump Larry Markkinen made, it's hard to almost not pick him. But it's fun. I think he got better on defense, and he's not strictly a play finisher. I want to make that clear, but it feels like we've seen his was more so, here's this opportunity, and he got to run with it finally, and he deserved it. He might make all NBA this year. And so you have to go back, look at player rankings heading into the season. I looked at Bleacher Reports, which I don't think either of us partook in this year. Did you participate in the NBA?
I don't think so.
I used to be the author of it. I'm not anymore. I was demoted. I wasn't demoted. So he didn't make the top 100. So he went from top 100 to what? 25, 30, 35. That's big. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was listed at 33, I think it was, or 34. He's probably he was fourth on our MVP ballot. I'm not saying that makes him he probably is a case for a top 10, 12 player in the league. That jump into the top 10 to 15 players in the league is hard because by the way, all NBA is so often framed as these were the 15 best players that season. And it's just not true because of the way the position breakdowns happen.
And the way we don't know what to do with minutes. That's the other minutes still matter for all NBA.
So I think Shai Gilgeous-Alexander by far and away made the more difficult leap. And I have Larry Markkinen number 2. I'm actually more curious now because I thought we were going to disagree. And look, if you pick Larry Markkinen and you just value the leap differently, I don't really have anything to say against you. This and MVP, unless you're going to frame your award the wrong way and say, in this case, well, look at Larry Markkinen's points per game jump. It went up by more than 10 and Shai's didn't go up by that much. And Shai still went up. He was over 30 for the season. I don't know his exact total, but it was a pretty significant spike from going from 24.5 to 31.4. And hey, your 3-point volume was lower. Come on. That's not easy either. So who was number 3 for you? Did you go that far?
So I just kind of had some also considered because I did think a lot of these awards, I did have it down to those two, but there are a lot of really good cases. So, I mean, we've spent some time talking about Jaren Jackson. He's a guy that has had the 3-point shot one year, and then the great defense another year, and then good scoring. Like he put it all together this year. So I don't know if that's quite improvement as much as it's like he had all these skills and he just finally like tapped into all of them in the same season and just got slightly better at everything. But he definitely gets some mention because offensively, especially late in the season, he really showed a level of like not just catch and shoot 3-point stuff, which is, by the way, how valuable is it to have the best shot blocker in the league and just being able to run off screens and shoot threes if you need him to? That's nuts. But
feels like pretty valuable.
Feels like pretty valuable. Like there's not really a Jaren Jackson type anymore. Like there's just one guy that does that. I think Jalen Brunson probably should get some mention there. I think Mikal Bridges is a weird case because he clearly got better before he was traded to Brooklyn and then just became a different human with the Nets, and I don't even recognize him really anymore. Nick Claxton got a lot better. Tyrese Halliburton, De'Aaron Fox. Those are all like, with the exception maybe of Claxton, who I think got a ton better. Those are all sort of more marginal.
He's like, I didn't go deeper than 3, and you didn't name my third yet. You named most of the other names that I considered. So some of the other names I considered that you didn't mention: Jaden McDaniels, Devin Vassell, Hamidou Diallo. I don't know if I'm just include. I even had Emmanuel quickly on here. I don't know if I included Hamidou Diallo and Devin Vassell just to be like, hey, I watch basketball sometimes. But they were the names that I have listed on the ballot. I didn't have De'Aaron Fox, but that is a good one because he got noticeably better. Mikal Bridges stuff is tough because he did get better in Phoenix, but it wasn't like the kind of sustainable and sizable leap. If he got traded to Brooklyn maybe like a month sooner, there might have been enough time for him to just come in and blow this award out of the order, because then you did the fringe, like number 4, let's say number 4 option case to number 1 option case. Like that's a pretty ridiculous leap to make. I went with Desmond Bane as my number 3. I think he probably played, when you look at minutes, I think you could say, did he play enough? But again, I said at the top, the back end of my ballot was going to be not throw minutes out the window, but I was going to be more flexible there. He's so good. You mentioned his defensive improvement. Just they can run pick and rolls with him now. He's hitting off the dribble threes. He's got like a step back. He'll bust out the stuff he can do in the lane. And if I am wrong about the Grizzlies, which is, there's probably a fairly high chance that I'll be wrong about the Grizzlies. I have them as a playoff pretender. I just don't think they're going to be effective there. I almost guarantee it'll be because Desmond Bane is that dude. And I value him properly, just not in the context of how much of an impact he can have on the Grizzlies. You were right to mention Jaren was on my list as well. The minute stuff gets weird for me, although I don't think he finished because Desmond Bane missed a bunch of time too. Desmond Bane finished at 1840 and Jackson was at 1790. So they were close enough in minutes to where if you were going to throw that out the window, I don't know if I trust it though from Jaren Jackson Jr. But the stuff that he's done on the ball more offensively, we're talking about someone where if he's just like the player that he was, let's say last quarter of the season, and this isn't saying he wasn't good for the first part when he came back. He changed the Grizzlies defense. If he's the player he's been for the last quarter of the season, like does he have a chance to be their best player?
I mean, I'll bet you. Well, that's a tough one. I'll bet you there'll be numbers that say he is, especially if Morant is like inefficient.
The Walker Kessler case for best.
Yeah,
player.
He'll be the Walker Kessler, right? Exactly. Like we'll at least have to like rebut what the numbers say potentially with him. But I think, I mean, even anecdotal, like it's really hard to look anecdotally like eye test better than Morant looks on most nights. But Jackson gets up there sometimes with just the way he appears from nowhere and block shots and then is hitting a 3 on the other end and is driving and finishing left on the next. Like he does have some real potential there. I don't know. That's a good question. One thing, what do you think about Julius Randle? Like not as a top 3 or anything, but is he like, did he improve or did he just like stop doing the bad stuff? I guess that's improving too.
It's shot selection, I would say, is better, and he moves the ball quicker. And it also feels like this is what I struggle with, because you can kind of make the case, can you regress and then your improvement from that regression is just so demonstrative that you end up being a most improved candidate? I think that Jalen Brunson and Quickly are better candidates. Brunson I struggled with because I was trying to figure out third place, and I'm just like, was this a matter of opportunity? He's not doing anything different than he did. Like this is everything he did in Dallas. And now let's see if it scales to the playoffs. But look, if you wanted to put him number 3, fine. I think the top 2 were clear though. Julius Randle did not make my ultra long.
No, I was just thinking like because considering how he was viewed last year versus this year, where he'll get all NBA consideration, might make a team. That's a pretty big jump, except like it's not that much better than 2 years ago. So like, I don't know what to do with that.
I will say, if you want to be, and they didn't, I had them in my mind, but like, if you wanted to go like real basketball, like sicko shit, Chris Dunn, Dennis Smith Jr.,
Yeah.
does Nick
Well, those
Richards
are like,
belong in there?
I mean, Smith and Dunn basically saved their careers. They're like, which in similar ways, because Smith is another guy that you have to, when you look at the advanced metrics, his defense grades out like almost Caruso levels. And so you have to sort of decide why you don't believe that number. I think when you're evaluating him, mostly because point guard defense doesn't really matter that much. But yeah, those two guys, we need a new award for, it's not like it's actually not over yet award, which would like Dunn and Smith would share this year.
That wouldn't be comeback player, right? Because that would imply that you need to come back from something.
Yeah, it's more just like, I don't know what you call it. We should crowdsource that. Somebody in the Discord figure it out.
I also bet you, do you know who I bet gets votes? He did not make my long list. Maybe he should have. I bet you Austin Reeves gets some votes.
That's just purely, well, yeah, I think so. I mean, his numbers are so stupid. They're so good. And he has so much game. I wonder if that's just an opportunity thing as much as anything too.
And then finally, I think he'll get a lot of votes, but it was my second year thing. And I'm assuming you think along the same lines, but Trey Murphy is going to get a shit ton of votes, I think.
Yeah. He's not that different of a player. Maybe a little more off the dribble stuff, but he's just like awesome dunks and really deep threes and moves off the ball. Like he's kind of the same.
You know who's going to be an early favorite of mine for 2024?
Who's that?
Player?
Evan Mobley. Jalen Suggs, because he's got nowhere to go but up. Is that?
Have you seen what he's done? Like over the last quarter of the season, he's like Eric Gordon and DeAnthony Melton, but better.
I would say he's a better bet to make an all defensive team. Suggs. Like I think Suggs is a guy that he's been hurt a lot, but I think his all defensive case is getting crushed by just how bad, granted he's been better offensively, but just how bad his offense has been. Cause you just almost don't consider a guy like that. It would be almost like young Chris Dunn for example, like just awesome, just no question, one of the best, backcourt defenders. But just like nobody watches him, nobody pays attention, and everybody's like, this guy's so bad offensively, you can't do anything with him. I thought you were going to say Evan Mobley for most improved next year because he's going to be.
That's an insult to Evan Mobley of 2023, though. MVP maybe, but most improved seems like a little unfair. Since we're talking about, unless you have anything to add, since we're on to the 2024 most improved player race, I think it might be time to wrap it up.
Yeah, that's probably good. Everybody, thank you for offering us your opinions and comments and not telling us we're idiots. Although I'm sure I'm going to get some Jalen Williams pick. You're an idiot.
You've done great. I might clip that up, throw it on shorts so that you can get all the Thunder followers on love. You've ingratiated yourself to Oklahoma City.
And like full disclosure, I did go to the same college as Jalen Williams, so price that bias in. And I've been on many text threads with Santa Clara people who have been saying he's this great for the last 2 years. And I did not believe it until this year. And now I believe it. So yeah, anyway, with that disclosure having been made, thanks for listening. Remember, like and subscribe, follow us, rate us 5 stars at HardwoodKnocks, at Dan Favale, at GT_Hughes. Be nice to each other. Tell your friends and enemies. What else do we need to say? Let's shout out Frank Ntilikina, maybe for the last time in a while. How about
the last game of the season? Luka Doncic needs to be benched so that Frank Ntilikina can fly.
Just let Frank shine. Let him get out there. And apologies to Jared Allen, who is the second best defender on his team, despite the awards I gave for Bleacher Report a couple weeks ago.